My name is Donna Dobkin. I was looking forward to watching this service on Zoom this morning in the comfort of my own home, in my pajamas with a cup of coffee in my hand, until my phone rang on Friday afternoon when Scott called me and asked me if I would speak today on reproductive rights from a woman's perspective. That felt like both an honor and an enormous task. And so what I hope to speak about this morning in my 8 or so minutes is a nugget of history of choice and freedom that women over all time have struggled to obtain with regards to reproductive rights. Women's efforts to obtain reproductive rights started with the battle for access to contraception, which has been historically constrained by governments, religious institutions, medical professionals, and others seeking to control reproduction by blocking access to and/or coercively imposing it on certain populations, thereby denying women choice over their bodies. Choice begets freedom, and freedom is what women have wanted and continue to want. I want to make clear that reproductive rights and reproductive justice must go hand in hand. It goes without saying, but I need to say it anyway, that throughout the history of our country, it is white men who have constrained women's use of contraception, and it is primarily white women who have benefited from the progress made over many years in this field. If, When, How is an organization of lawyers for reproductive justice, and they state that, quote, due to continuing institutionalized racism and a history of reproductive oppression, many African Americans today have limited access to adequate reproductive health care, higher rates of reproductive health issues, and are disproportionately impacted by restrictions on family health services. Low-income people are especially likely to lack control over their reproductive choices, thereby impacting women of color much more significantly than white women. Today, abortion is the hot reproductive rights issue that's currently in the hands of the Supreme Court, but the struggle regarding reproduction rights started with the issue of contraception. So, a little history. In 1914, what is that, over 100 years ago, public health nurse Margaret Sanger declared, quote, enforced motherhood is the most complete denial of a woman's right to life and liberty, and coined the term birth control. In 1916, Margaret Sanger set up the first birth control clinic in Brooklyn, New York. The next year, however, a New York court convicted Sanger of maintaining a public nuisance by dispensing contraceptive devices and sentenced her to 30 days in jail. Undeterred, when she was released, she reopened her clinic and continued to persevere through more arrests and prosecutions. In 1918, the New York State Court of Appeals reversed the criminal conviction of Margaret Sanger, ruling that New York's limitations on the distribution of birth control were unconstitutional because they infringed upon women's liberties by forcing them to conceive more children than they wanted. This was the beginning of the legal standing of women's reproductive rights in this country and the organized fight for women to control their bodies, their pregnancies, and therefore their lives. However, over the next 50 years, several state laws passed prohibiting the use of contraception. In 1927, the Supreme Court even ruled that coerced sterilization, mostly of minorities and mentally ill, did not violate the United States Constitution. And so years of reproductive oppression continued. You may not know that as late as 1965, the use of contraception was illegal in most states in this country. It took the Supreme Court in Griswold versus Connecticut to make a landmark decision in which the court ruled that the Constitution of the United States protects the liberty of married couples to buy and use contraception without government restriction. Yes, married couples. The legal use of contraception for single women didn't come until 7 years later. It should be noted that men around the world have placed the responsibility and burden of birth control on women. In the United States, this requires a trip to the doctor, a prescription, and the money to purchase the prescription on an ongoing and regular basis. And the side effects can be quite severe for many women. On the other hand, the research and production of male contraception, other than condoms, was halted over the years when the side effects were seemingly weighed against the benefits that they provided. Right. Let's face it, men cause 100% of all unwanted pregnancies. Yeah. Yes. Although men actually cause 100% of unwanted pregnancies, given the ways our laws are structured in this country, men have relatively little responsibility or face little, if any, consequences when unwanted pregnancies occur. So where are we today from a legal perspective? Contraception is no longer illegal. Contraception is accessible to women who have good and consistent health care. This means that contraception is less accessible to women who are economically or otherwise challenged in receiving medical care. Sex education is not taught in many schools in this country, and so sex education regarding the use of contraception is limited to those school districts that place it as a priority. And with regard to abortion, this from NPR, quote, "When the Supreme Court hands down its decision in a highly watched Mississippi abortion case this summer, access to legal abortion could end for more than 100 million American women, including those living in nearly every southern state and large swaths of the Midwest. 21 states are currently poised to immediately ban or acutely curtail access to abortion if the Supreme Court chooses to overturn or weaken Roe v. Wade, the landmark 1973 decision that for nearly 50 years has guaranteed women's right to seek an abortion." So where do we stand from one woman's perspective? We are a sisterhood of diverse women still struggling. We are women in our 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s who remember steeling ourselves for unwanted pregnancies, who remember trying our own methods of terminating pregnancies, who remember having little access to birth control, let alone abortions, who remember having friends, sisters, aunts, and others dying from back alley illegal abortions performed all over this country. And we are also a sisterhood of some older, diverse women who have used contraception and or had abortions, having been afforded the opportunity of choice. We are a sisterhood of diverse, middle-aged women, struggling to work and support families, to carry the burden of maintaining a family size that keeps us out of poverty, that allows us to live lives with a modicum of control over our economic situations, not determined by the number of children we have. And we are also a sisterhood of some diverse middle-aged women who have used contraception and or had abortions, having been afforded the opportunity of choice. We are a sisterhood of diverse young women who have goals and aspirations for ourselves, desiring to have control over our bodies in order to prevent us from becoming mothers too early in life or at all, eager to explore our bodies and live our lives without being told that a pregnancy must be kept. And we are also a sisterhood of some diverse young women who know about and have used contraception and or have had abortions and therefore have been afforded the opportunity of choice. We are a sisterhood of diverse women of all ages all over the globe who are sexual beings and want the chance to enjoy full lives of our choice and therefore experience the freedom that comes with this. Today, as we talk about reproductive rights, we can say that reproductive rights for women are our civil rights, but it is the words of Hillary Rodham Clinton that come to my mind when thinking about the rights of women. Women's rights are human rights. Thank you.
So this song, Sally's Pigeons, one thing that's important to make clear is that Sally is a guy. Cyndi Lauper and Mary Chapin Carpenter wrote this song together and shared their stories of experiences. And so Sally was this man who had pigeons. So that kind of helps understand that part of the song. When I was 8, I had a friend with a pirate smile. Make believe and play pretend we were innocent and wild. Hopped a fence and slammed the gate, running down my alleyway in time to watch Sally's pigeons fly. We love to watch them dive and soar, circle in the sky, free as a bird from 3 to 4, and never knowing why. Neighbors pulled their wash back in, put away my Barbie and Ken. Look out overhead while Sally's pigeons fly. I had a fool's confidence that the world had no boundaries, but instincts and common sense come in different quantities. My heart began to skip to the beat of the boy next door. She had her eye across the street on someone shy and tall. We lived our dreams and challenged fate. In tears she told me she was late, and Sally let his pigeons out to fly. was lost from some back alley job. I close my eyes and Sally's pigeons fly. She never saw those birds again, and me, I can't remember when a pirate smile hasn't made me cry. I close my eyes and Sally's pigeons fly.
Sex in the sanctuary, power, religion, and choice. So before we begin, I just want to be clear that we like it that we are a community that worships online and in person, so sex in the sanctuary was not a cheap ploy to get people to come to worship today, but you showed up no matter what, so thank you for being here. Also, I'm learning the Bend Bulletin, as they printed the title for this morning's service, dropped the subtitle of Power, Religion, and Choice, and it just read Sex in the Sanctuary. What's more, it actually said Sex in the Sanctuary with Reverend Scott Rudolph. So I don't know what your intentions are for being here today, but I'll just be preaching a sermon this morning, and we will leave it at that. The second thing I want to talk about before I talk about what I want to talk about is that I recognize that this can be a difficult topic, that the issues that we are discussing today, in particular abortion, are among the most emotional and sensitive topics that we could imagine. And I'm sure that each of us has been touched or will be touched in this room in some way by this issue. And I want to say that each person's experiences and emotions around these issues are unique, and they're yours, and that is okay. I trust that this community is strong enough and loving enough to hold a space for each of us. As one of our Unitarian forebears, Francis David, said, we need not think alike to love alike. So I trust that as a community, we can hold all of that, right? Okay? Okay. And the third thing I want to talk about before I talk about what I want to talk about is that I recognize that I am a white man talking about this issue of women's rights. And that's why I'm so grateful for Donna for sharing her eloquent and moving words with us this morning. It's important to center a woman's voice in this conversation. And I also think it's important for men to engage this conversation, not to take it over, not to start running the conversation, but to be a part of the conversation as an ally, as someone who's listening, as someone who is supporting women and women's rights in our country. So to now talk about what I want to talk about, having talked about the things before I talk about what I want to talk about, because talking about it is what is happening in our country right now. There is a conversation happening in America. Indeed, just this morning, on the way to the fellowship, there was about a 10-minute piece on NPR around a woman's right to choose. In part, this is because on Friday in Washington, D.C., the Right for Life March occurred. And everyone is talking about this Mississippi law that the Supreme Court will rule on this summer. And also the Texas law that bafflingly creates the ability for anyone to sue anyone whenever they want around this issue. I grew up in a world that just knew Roe versus Wade as the law. And if it's overturned, it's likely that 24 states would quickly move to ban abortion. Our local Planned Parenthood here in Bend is very aware of this. They see that if this were to happen this summer, that Idaho might be one of those states, and that Central Oregon and Bend would be the closest place that a woman could go to receive this health care. Our country has known both sides of this issue. It has known a system that has outlawed abortion. It has known one that has made it now legal and safe. But it's also known a system within that legality to create tons of restrictions and limitations by states to make it difficult for a woman to receive the health care that she wishes. So I went to our Planned Parenthood office this week. I wanted to go there to let them know that I support them as an individual. But I wanted to hear also their perspective and where they are in this conversation right now and how they're experiencing it. And as I went into that waiting room at Planned Parenthood off Division Street, I just imagined all of the women and men who have crossed the threshold of that space, walked into that waiting room and received health care, life-affirming or life-saving health care. Health care that should be available to all humans. Health care to help us live a healthy life. And in our conversation, I sat down with the manager of Planned Parenthood and I asked a large question, which she answered very simply. And it was, why did you get called to this work? And she thought about it and said, that's a big question. But then she said simply, because of issues of freedom and feminism and bodily autonomy. Freedom, feminism, and bodily autonomy. As a man, I cannot imagine what that would feel like to have a legal system to make such a private and personal decision on my behalf of what I do with my body. The Unitarian Universalist minister and dear friend Barbara Prose once said that no one can know another human being's life circumstances well enough to intervene in the most important decision of their life. Choosing to bring a baby into the world is the greatest act of generosity any woman can make. She is choosing to share her body, a choice that only she should have the right to make. Consider this, she continues. No one is forced to perform any other life-giving act of generosity, such as giving a kidney or sharing a liver with someone in need. Thus, we cannot and should not force women to bear children. It does become an issue of freedom. And freedom is a deeply religious issue. And I would say so is sex. That is why we should be talking about sex in the sanctuary. Butch Hancock, who grew up in Texas and was a country music singer in the 1970s, he was part of a band called the Flatliners, and he wrote, "Life in Lubbock, Texas taught me two things. One is that God loves you and you're going to go to hell. The other is that sex is the most awful, filthy thing on earth, and you should save it for someone you love." Yeah, churches are often conflicted around sex. And the fact is, our spiritual life and our religious life and sex are deeply intertwined. Our own bodies and how we know ourselves as sexual and spiritual creatures. Religion always seems to have had something to say about this, whether it's far conservative or far progressive. I remember when I was a young child and had questions about sex for the first time, there wasn't really sexuality education at that point in my life, and so I turned to the Bible. to see what the Bible had to say about this. Religious communities seem to always have something to say about our bodies and how we should engage that. We know that sexuality and faith can be incredibly healthy and good. We also know that sexuality and health can be deeply scarred and broken through judgment and shame and exploitation by a government or by a religion, but most certainly by other people. Religion has done an incredibly large amount of damage to what people consider to be a healthy sexuality. And so it would seem that religion could also play a part in recasting and re-understanding for other generations of what it means to have a healthy sexuality. In fact, I think as religious people, we have to have these conversations and be involved in this struggle if we ever want progress towards reproductive health and rights and justice. And the reason is because so much opposition to those ideas comes from religious groups and religious thinking, the religious right and the moral majority. So what we do or don't do, what we say or don't say, the conversations that we're willing to have in a healthy, productive way, or the conversations that we are embarrassed to have and won't have, all of these matter. And this conversation is nothing new to Unitarian Universalists. 59 years ago, Unitarian Universalists became the first religious organization to support a woman's right to choose. And since then, other religious denominations have done the same. But it's not just that. As Unitarian Universalists, a long-held and deeply coveted or appreciated program in our congregations is the Our Whole Lives Sexuality Education Program, or our OWL program. This began as sexuality education for children, age appropriate, from kindergarten all the way up through high school. And then we kept thinking, wait, sexuality doesn't just end then, does it? And so there's a program for young adults. And then we kept thinking, we thought, oh, sexuality doesn't just end then, does it? And so we continued to create curriculum. And now there is truly curriculum that goes from kindergarten and preschool through the oldest years of our lives. We believe that having these conversations in a healthy and safe and curious space, such as our religious communities, is important because it's a part of who we are as people, as spiritual beings. And so, also, Unitarian Universalists have adopted a particular approach to women's rights, and it's reproductive justice. Reproductive justice is a bit different. It's a particular approach, and it was created by women of color. Back in 1993, they realized that the framework of just choice movement didn't sufficiently speak to their communities. It was not advocating for them in the way that they saw. It was advocating for white women. And so they began to look at reproductive justice as a wider way of approaching this. And there are 4 general principles of this. 1, yes, people have the right to not have children. 2, people have the right to have children. 3, people have a right to raise their children in safe and healthy environments. And 4, every person has a right to health and self-determination regarding their bodies and sexuality, free from oppression and shame. In 2012 to 2016, Unitarian Universalists adopted this as our national study action issue. The reproductive justice frameworks calls upon us to look around us and make connections about our entire system and society. This intersectional approach, it recognizes identities as a part of this, our gender, our class, our race, our sexual orientation, our immigration status, all these different identities intersecting. From this reproductive justice approach, yes, it can sound like a lot at once, layering all those things in conversation, and it's complicated. But yes, all of this is complicated when we start thinking about all of our identities and how they relate to one another. And so when we talk about sexuality education, we don't just say we want sexuality education in our schools, but we say, what's happening in the system of the school? How are the teachers supported? How are the parents supported? What's going on in the tax bracket that's supporting the school's finances? All of these things connect and relate to each other. So it becomes a conversation about resources and power. Who has the power in any given system? Who doesn't have power in any given system? And why? And how can that become more equitable? This is one of the most important things about this process and approach of reproductive justice, about power. Who gets to decide? Who makes the decisions? And as Donna said, it has for a very long time been white men making these decisions. And these are people who believe that it is okay for one group to control another group by imposing their religious views on them. And that is why, as a people of faith, this is so critically important to us, because we believe, as Unitarian Universalists, deeply in freedom. Freedom for you, freedom for me, freedom to be who it is that we are. We have a theology that offers us diversity, pluralism, not just in our beliefs and how we think, but in who it is that we are in this world. Our Unitarian Universalist theology says that all people have inherent worth and dignity, and all people should be valued and be able to make decisions in their own lives about what that life will be, and that an outside group shouldn't be able to control that. We believe that there's strength in diversity, and that imperfection is okay, and that we are all growing on a journey and on a process. We believe in connections and relationship to one another, so that it's not just about freedom to do whatever you want, whenever you want, but how it affects other people around you, and in what ways that becomes love in a transformative, collaborative way. This work is bound up with liberation. Liberation with those who are oppressed, which, as we know, is our own liberation as well. If you are a woman, you are invited and are a part of that sisterhood that Donna spoke about. You are already a part of that sisterhood. If you are a man, I invite you to join a brotherhood of feminists who want freedom and bodily autonomy for every single person. A brotherhood of people who support women, who listen to women, who respect women, who believe that this is our work as well. Men who challenge patriarchal thinking and habits that we might not even see or know that we have, but are all too clear to the females in our lives. And to all of us, sisterhood, a brotherhood, but a siblinghood, a humanhood, all of us together to create more love in the world and more freedom for every single individual. Freedom, it might very well be the central Unitarian Universalist tenet. Our religious faith that says freedom, yes, and relationship, yes. And what are the ways that that works and moves in the world? What is the fluid relationship between those two? Freedom and relationship. We believe in freedom. Freedom to be who you are. Freedom to love who you want. To relate to the universe in the way that calls uniquely to you. Only to you. Because only you can be you. And you need freedom sometimes to hear and respond to that. Freedom that you might live out your life as you are called to know it, and to be in relationship with other people as they do the same. This is our work as religious people. We do this together. We wonder and are curious about the new ways that freedom can move and work in our world and in our own lives, while all the time being bound to one another in intimate and deep relationship. Freedom and relationship. What are the ways that those will relate to one another? And what are the ways that they will move and work in our own lives? Those are the questions we are called to live out with the very being of our lives and throughout our days. May it be so.